There is a specific kind of person who pauses in the doorway before they leave for work, looks back at a spider plant on the windowsill and says, "Okay, don't miss me too much." They adjust one leaf like they're fixing a friend's collar, check the moisture with their fingertip, and nod as if the plant has answered. If you watched closely, you'd see the way their shoulders soften when they do this. How the tension in their jaw drops by a few millimeters. Outside, traffic roars past a strip mall and a 4-lane road, America doing its loud, impatient thing. But inside that apartment, for a tiny moment, is just one human being and one quiet, green listener. That moment is worth examining because the plant isn't really the point. The soil, the leaves, even the question of whether talking helps it grow. Those are side characters. The real story is what's happening inside the person who's talking. To understand people who talk to their plants, you have to start with anthropomorphism. Anthropomorphism is the tendency to assign human thoughts, feelings, and intentions to non-human things. Pets, gadgets, storms, and yes, plants. Psychologists like Nicholas Epley and others argue that anthropomorphism is not childish stupidity, but a byproduct of the same social brain machinery that makes humans uniquely good at understanding other minds. In plain language, the same circuits that let you guess what your friend is feeling will happily light up for a pothos vine if you let them. Why would we do this? One reason is that our ancestors were better off assuming that rustling in the bushes was a living agent with intentions than treating everything as dead and harmless. Seeing mind everywhere kept them alive. That bias didn't just disappear because we now live in apartments and drive SUVs. Someone looks at a drooping peace lily and says, Okay, I get it. You're mad at me. I'll water you." Intellectually, they know the plant isn't mad, but emotionally, it's much easier to respond to a grumpy friend than to a bundle of xylem and phloem. When people talk to their plants, they're not just moving their mouths. They're engaging the social parts of their brain, mapping human categories, mood, personality, relationship, onto something that can't talk back but can still feel strangely, comfortingly alive. There's a retired mail carrier named Thomas from St. Paul, Minnesota. His wife died 4 years ago, and the house turned very quiet, very fast. At first, he kept the TV on all day just to have voices in the background. Then his daughter brought him a big fiddle leaf fig and set it in the sunny corner of the living room. He rolled his eyes. "What am I supposed to do with a tree in my house?" But he started watering it anyway. A year later, if you walk past his window early in the morning, you'll see him standing there with a mug of coffee, talking to the fig. He comments on new leaves. "Look at you, show off." He complains about the Minnesota winter to it like it's an old co-worker. Sometimes, when he forgets and slips into we've made it through worse winters than this. He doesn't correct himself. When a neighbour asked him why he talks to a plant, he shrugged and said, "Look, it's not like it talks back, but it's here, it's alive. It listens better than most people I've met." On paper, Thomas is just an older man with a houseplant. Psychologically, he's doing something much more complex, building a kind of one-sided, low-stakes relationship with a living thing that makes the silence of his house feel less empty. Psychologists have a name for relationships that are one-sided, but still emotionally real. Parasocial relationships. Parasocial relationships are those one-way bonds we form with media figures, fictional characters, or other entities that will never actually meet us, but still feel like someone in our life. More broadly, researchers use the term social surrogates for non-human targets, like fictional worlds, media figures, or objects that people use to satisfy their need for belonging when real relationships are limited or painful. Studies on social surrogates show that when people feel lonely, rejected, or socially threatened, they're more likely to turn to these one-sided relationships to restore a feeling of connection and protect themselves from the costs of isolation. Recent work suggests that parasocial connections can genuinely help people regulate emotions and feel less alone, even if the other side isn't real in the usual sense. Now imagine applying that same psychological machinery to plants. A recent paper explicitly argues that parasocial relationship theory is a useful way to understand how people relate to indoor plants, treating them as stable presence, sources of comfort, and even quasi-companions in their home. Plants are always there, they never interrupt, and they certainly never betray you. A grad student in a studio apartment in Boston comes home exhausted and says to their philodendron, "You're the only one who gets how much this semester sucks." Objectively, that's absurd. Psychologically, they're using that plant as a social surrogate, a safe, non-judgmental stand-in for the emotional support they wish they had from people. Talking to plants isn't only about connection, it's also about control and care. Human relationships are messy. People can misunderstand you, reject you, or leave. A plant, by contrast, offers a simpler equation. You water, you light, you fertilize. Most of the time, it quietly responds by growing. There's some evidence that sound and vibration can affect plant growth. Certain studies have found gene activation and improved growth in response to music or sound at conversational volumes. But the science is still mixed, and there's no solid consensus that human speech in particular has a unique effect on plants. For plant lovers, that's almost beside the point. What matters psychologically is that they feel their caring actions, watering, adjusting, talking, are landing somewhere. In research on social surrogates, people are often drawn to these non-human relationships when they've been hurt or disappointed in human ones. A plant gives you a way to practice care without the full risk of vulnerability. You can pour tenderness into misting leaves or encouraging a struggling fern. "Come on, you got this," without worrying that it will suddenly turn on you or bring up something from 5 years ago. For someone with a high need for affiliation, but also a strong fear of rejection, plants are the perfect compromise. A relationship that feels warm and responsive, but can never actually hurt you. Then there's the story layer. People who talk to their plants almost always, if you listen carefully, end up telling a story about themselves. Articles on anthropomorphism note that we don't anthropomorphize everything. We tend to humanize entities that feel important, unpredictable, or socially relevant to us. We give a plant a name, a personality, a backstory, because we're trying to organize and simplify something complex, our environment, our feelings, into a relationship our brains know how to handle. So the plant in your office becomes the tough one that survived neglect, and suddenly it's a symbol of your own resilience. The orchid you bought during a breakup becomes high maintenance, and you joke that you're finally in a relationship that's more dramatic than you are. On the little cactus on your desk that you say "good job" to every Monday is, in some corner of your mind, the version of you that keeps hanging on in dry conditions. One science writer described talking to their plants as a way of narrating companionship and identity, essentially building a social world in which these non-human entities are meaningful participants. In psychological terms, the plant becomes a prop in your ongoing life story, a character you can project onto, confide in, even argue with without consequences. People who love talking to their plants are, often, people who have discovered that it's easier to be kind, playful, and forgiving toward a rubber tree than toward themselves. And over time, that kindness can leak inward. Underneath all of this is a simple fact. A lot of people in the modern US feel lonely, overstimulated, or emotionally unsupported, even while being connected all the time. Plants offer a strangely effective valve for that pressure. Research on social surrogates shows that when real belonging is shaky, people lean harder into one-sided relationships with media figures, fictional characters, and other non-human surrogates to soothe emotional pain. Talking to plants fits this pattern perfectly. It's a way to vent, to rehearse conversations, to say things out loud without fear of judgment. A Washington Post piece on talking to plants quoted people who said it feels nice and that they believe their plants gain a sense of community from being spoken to, even while acknowledging the science is uncertain. Always that feeling of community, though, might be doing more for the human speaker than for the plant. If talking to a philodendron lets someone externalize worry, practice self-soothing, or feel less alone, their nervous system will register that as real relief, even if the chlorophyll is indifferent. For some, it's almost like prayer. Speaking into a space where you don't expect a direct reply, but you do expect to feel different afterwards. The plant becomes a green confessional booth. But there's a darker side worth examining. Not every conversation with a plant comes from a place of playful intelligence or gentle self-care. The same behaviors that look cute and wholesome on Instagram can, in some cases, be driven by deep loneliness, unresolved grief, or social anxiety. Psychologists studying social surrogates warn that while these one-sided relationships can buffer people from pain, they can also encourage avoidance, using surrogate connections instead of taking the risk of real human contact. Imagine someone who's been badly betrayed by friends or partners. Talking to plants might feel safer than trying again with people. Over time, that safety can harden into isolation. It's the emotional equivalent of staying in a warm bath that's slowly cooling down instead of getting out and facing the cold air. There's also a risk of magical thinking, believing that if you just send good vibes to your plants, you don't need to learn about their actual needs, pests, or diseases. Some horticulture writers have pointed out that extreme plant anthropomorphism sometimes goes hand in hand with ignoring real plant science and care. The emotional story replaces objective understanding. This doesn't mean all plant talking stems from pathology, or that anyone who This is where many people misread plant talkers. They see someone cooing to a monstera on TikTok and assume they're just quirky, attention-seeking, or a little unhinged. Or they see an older neighbour chatting with roses and write it off as eccentricity or age. But underneath, something else is often operating. That crazy plant person might be a highly socially attuned person whose brain is so good at reading minds that it can't help but project one onto a ficus. The widower talking to his fig tree might be using the plant as a social surrogate, an emotionally safe stand-in while he slowly learns how to live with loss. That anxious 20-something hyping up her seedlings. "You guys are doing amazing, sweeties," might be practicing a tone of encouragement she was never given, on trying it out on plants before she can use it on herself. From the outside, you see someone talking into a room where nothing answers. What looks like silliness is actually a sophisticated way of using the social brain on a low-risk target. What looks like loners who love plants is often people finding creative social surrogates in a world where real connection feels scarce or costly. What looks like talking to plants is, on a deeper layer, talking themselves through loneliness, grief, stress, and change, using leaves and stems as the safest audience they can find. Understanding people who talk to their plants ultimately reveals something about all human behaviour. We all need to feel heard, even if nothing answers back. We all need to project our inner world onto something outside of us. Stories, art, music, prayer, journals, fandoms, just to see what we feel in a form we can relate to. We all reach for surrogates sometimes, a favourite show, a song on repeat, a pet, a routine, a place. The specific person whispering encouragement to a pothos in a Brooklyn apartment isn't fundamentally different from the person who talks to their car, their dog, or even to themselves in the mirror. They've simply chosen a quieter, greener mirror. So the next time you catch yourself about to roll your eyes at someone saying, "You did great this week," to a philodendron, pause for a second. Ask what they might be rehearsing, healing, or holding together with that tiny ritual. Because beneath the jokes and memes, there's a serious, almost tender truth. In a country where so many conversations feel rushed, distracted, or transactional, a plant will give you something most people won't: its full, silent presence. Maybe the more interesting question isn't, why are they talking to a plant? Maybe the more interesting question is, where do you go when you need to say something out loud without being interrupted, without being judged, and without the fear that the listener will leave? And what would happen if you offered yourself the same patience and gentle attention you so easily give to a pot of green on your windowsill?